historically. We are the debris, forgotten faces, never more to be. Instead of legends fighting for something that had no guarantees, living ghosts we chose to live and die as their worker bees. Why didn't we break out from their hide? Why didn't we follow our own sun to another life? Why didn't we scroll over all their flowers? Brothers and sisters, it's okay to be free. Brothers and sisters, it's time to be freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom to choose, freedom to talk, freedom of religion and association, freedom of the press, freedom to be you, freedom to be you, freedom to be me. I can feel your secret vibrations like our last fading song. It's time, oh, it's time to be free. I can hear your vibrations like a final human cry. Oh, it's time, oh, it is time to be way past time to be free.
Yep. So Daisy, here he is. Okay. Gert's on his way. He just sent us an email saying he wanted the link resent, so he's on his way. And so why don't you take your time introducing him? Hopefully, by the time you've finished introducing him, he'll be here.
That's right. Well, Geert has quite a decent resume. Geert Vanden Bossche attained his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine at the Faculty of Ghent and his PhD in virology at the University of Hohenheim, Stuttgart. Following his postdoctoral training in virology, immunology, and molecular biology at the Free University of Berlin and the University of Hohenheim, where he subsequently held adjunct appointments, and he transitioned into the vaccine industry to serve various roles in both early and late vaccine development. He then joined the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and to serve as a senior program officer in vaccines discovery and global health. Furthermore, Geert also founded UNIVAC, coordinated the Ebola vaccine program on behalf of GAVI, and serves as a visiting scientist at the Riga Institute, University of Leuven. Geert is board certified in virology and microbiology, and he is the author of over 30 publications and an inventor on a patent application for universal vaccines. He has presented vaccine and adjuvant-related topics at multiple congresses, and I'm sure Geert will get us up to speed with, this is from 2017, so I'm sure he's moved on.
Oh, yeah. It's gone. Okay, let's get him in, eh?
But just before,
yeah.
Let's get him up, and I'll show him how I came to be entangled with Doctor.
Okay.
Dr.
Hello, Doctor. How are you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. It's a real treat to
perfect,
have you.
perfect.
We've been watching you for 5 years from that trench, from the COVID trench, on our phones as the
I can't
vaccines
see
and MR
myself
shoots
on the
over our heads.
screen, but that's probably not an issue. I don't know
Oh, you
why.
can't see
Oh
yourself?
no, I can. Now it's perfect. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. There
okay.
we go.
Well, sorry for there wasn't any link in the email.
No, that was my screw up. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, here we
No
are.
worries. It's dementia. There's now this is Dr. Paul Oosterhuis, and he's going to do most of the talking because he and you are sort of related through adversity together, and you might not be aware of it. So I'll let Paul take it from there.
Yeah. What a pleasure to catch up with you finally, Geert. I've been, sending you messages on Twitter backwards and forwards over the years. I'm an anesthesiologist, so I'm not a vaccinologist. I'm not an immunologist. I was a senior specialist in anesthesia and critical care. And in 2021, I saw your interview with Brett Weinstein and Robert Malone on the Dark Horse podcast. And it got me a bit fired up. And I did this post. And it led to me being the first doctor in Australia to be suspended for talking against a COVID policy. So this, and the lawyers at the time who were defending me at my suspension trial thought this was the bad post. This was the worst one. I said, there's no science to back up anything the government's doing. No evidence for lockdowns, no evidence for masks. There is evidence that the vaccines are having marginal or no effectiveness and real risks and harms which are being suppressed from the jabs and from the totalitarian lockdowns, which are doing massive harm. Now, this is why I mentioned you. I think Geert Vanden Bossche spelled out the problem. He predicted vaccinating during a pandemic would drive variants and immune escape. We are seeing that with all these variants later. And he also said that these highly specific antibodies produced by the jabs would outcompete natural immunity. And this makes us more vulnerable to the disease, and we're seeing it. At the 58-minute mark, Dr. Geert Vanden Bossche highlighted his deepest concern that the vaccine antibodies would render innate antibodies inactive, making people more vulnerable to disease. So Geert, that's part of my heresy. I also had 3 posts where I raised the issue of antibody-dependent enhancement. They selected 10 of my posts, but this one had the biggest target on it. And I was terrified that we were giving these shots to children who were relying on their innate immune system to keep them well. And the idea of giving them anything that could sideline the capacity of their innate immune system or produce a mono, we understand that in genetics, you don't want to have a limited crop of genetic expression. When you have extinctions and you have little genetic diversity, you put the whole species at risk. And I thought of this as a bit of a form of that, where you're producing a monoculture of immune response, and that could be of danger. So, that's how I got started. Good. I was trying to echo your concerns that the vaccinating during a pandemic was a really bad idea. And I had heard about antibody-dependent enhancement. I was seeing it manifest already, and they was injecting it to younger and younger people and pregnant women, which made no sense to me. And I saw real danger, that, as an anesthesiologist, we spend our lives trying to avoid risk,
Yeah.
And every time I put in a report, you'd have the severity assessment scale, where, even things which are unlikely, tail risk, if they've got an extreme risk or a severe outcome, you have to pay attention to them. That was always the way. Something's gone a bit nuts, I think. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very true. And well, first of all, you guys have been so courageous, because the situation in Australia was awful. When I think that this used to be one of my favorite countries, what I've seen there happening, it was just unbelievable. And to your point, Paul, I would even push it one step further with regard to the safety and the concerns. I would even say, if there is any scientific concern, without even having proof of it, but based on the science and based on what we know, if there is any concern that these things could go wrong, this, for me, in its own right, would be a complete showstopper. And even that, I think, should be part of the informed consent. Not only the data as such, but even the concerns, the legitimate concerns based on science, should, for me, be a mandatory part of the informed consent. Because here, what has been done, there is no other word for it. This has been an experiment, just out of the blue, an experiment with many, many, many unknowns. And, and then you roll this out on basically all of the population, right? And even plenty of people that were not even part of the very limited clinical trials that have been conducted, like, especially young children, especially also people who got already exposed to the infection, especially also very elderly people, especially also pregnant women, and you could continue. So it's just be such a scam and a shame. It's unbelievable, of course, and the bad thing is that none of they got none of the science right. There is absolutely no science behind anything of what they have been imposing to people. So it's completely, for me as a vaccinologist, having worked so many years in this business on both sides, the for-profit and the non-profit, just incredible what happened, and certainly completely unprecedented, and so in contrast to what many people are thinking or maybe thinking. We are not at all at the end of the tunnel right now. There is still a long way to go, and with lots of uncertainty. Yes, nobody knows exactly where this is going to lead in the end, but it seems like things are calming down in terms also of the biology, and the virus going away, and the immune system having it more or less under control, etc. And none of this applies. But so I'm over to you, please.
What started me before the vaccine was the realization that you could treat it, that there were effective antivirals, that vitamin D, that zinc, that hydroxychloroquine, and then later ivermectin with an appropriate antibiotic that tend to be zinc ionophores like azithromycin and doxycycline. So for about a year and a half, Geert, I walked around telling everyone who would hear that you could treat COVID. You didn't have to rush for a suboptimal rushed synthetic gene injection. So this you could say that this is part of my belief system, but I've got lots of evidence that So if you could treat it, then the whole EUA for these products was invalid, and it should have never got off the ground. They should have just used these safe generic known entities to control it. But one of my other posts that they selected to go against me was about this. I said, tell everyone to take vitamin D, zinc, ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine, and they said, no, this is false and misinformation. But it's sort of important because we never needed to vaccinate everyone, in my opinion. It got so bad that I felt I wasn't a doctor anymore. I was some sort of like priest or lama, and I do this all the time. I find my tube of ivermectin, my horse paste, and I bless everyone in the name of the holy horse paste, the hydroxy, the vitamin D, the zinc, the quercetin, and the zinc ionophores, and the mysterious melatonin.
Yeah.
It was just mind-boggling that they couldn't see that. And natural immunity, one of my 10 posts, I said, what happened to natural immunity? Past infection we've always known that. I don't think you have to be an immunologist with the huge amount of information and training you have to understand that if you've had a past infection, that's going to provide you with the best protection you can get.
Yeah, but again, for me, it has been just stunning the lack of knowledge and the lack of science. Because at the very beginning, remember, at the very beginning, there were in many countries, including my country in Belgium, they were checking on the antibody titers as a measure for herd immunity, right? So now, back to your point, very easy. You almost, you don't need to be an immunologist, but everybody knows, or almost everybody has heard that the innate immunity, that's the first thing you learn about immunology, even in a very basic course. Innate immunity is the first line of immune defense. If you compare this to a military system where at the border of the country, your first line of immune defense, you have like the infantry doing a very, very good job in not allowing the enemy to penetrate into the country. Then you don't need inside your country special forces that need to be very specialized to attack the enemy in one way or the other, because the enemy will be withheld already at the border, the first line of immune defense. So that means if your innate immunity is doing a very good job, you're not going to need the special forces. So in other words, your adaptive immunity, which are the special forces, the B cells that produce the antibodies, and the T cells, will not be solicited. So guess what? They saw that after months, after the pandemic started, only a minor part of the people were mounting antibody responses. So they were concluding this is a very bad sign because, we won't have herd immunity, etc. And it was, in fact, an excellent sign, because it was just proving that despite the spread of the virus, most of the people, healthy people, especially younger people, adolescents, etc., were completely controlling this virus by virtue of innate immunity. They didn't need to rely on the special forces. And if they did, it was just like a little bit where the antibodies were mounting for like just a few weeks and then already declining. And, so the innate immunity, although in every single textbook, it is said, the first thing about the immune system, you have the innate, you have the adaptive, and the innate is like the first line of immune defense. They were completely ignoring this, and they are still doing this, because I can tell you, no vaccinologist is really interested in innate immunity, because that is broad that is non-specific. And, all the vaccines that we have are very specific or focused on antibody responses, on T-cell responses, on the special forces. Whereas in this case, this virus, the lab-made virus, or in fact, certainly the virus released by a lab leak at least, was in fact controlled by most of the people. And I'm pretty sure that if we wouldn't have done anything, except of course, to your point, Paul, treating people who got the disease really and were suffering from it, but if for all of the rest of the people of the population, we would just have let spread it. Either we would have herd immunity or the virus would have died out simply, right? It wouldn't have been a global pandemic. So this notion already in immunology that everybody talks about innate immunity, it's in all textbooks. There are very nice cartoons on the innate immune response and the adaptive immune response. And then when it comes really to fighting something that the population has not been exposed upon, so where there is no specific memory, all you can rely upon that becomes very important is the innate immunity. And the innate immunity at the population level was doing an excellent job, because the proof was that after months and months of spread, a minority only of people were having antibodies that were more or less substantial, right? So, and then they say, we need to help a little bit the natural immunity. We need to help, and therefore we need to vaccinate. And guess what? What you need is the higher the better, the higher the titers, the better. Now, this is it's almost become a dogma in immunology that, this notion of the more the better never applies in immunology. It may apply for pharmaceuticals, because if you have a high concentration, of course, the half-life time will be prolonged of your drug in the blood, and that could have a beneficial effect. But immunity doesn't work like this, right? It's about a signal, and, just looking at these titers, compare the titers that you got after natural infection, which were for most people very low, and short-lived, which was excellent. And then they were saying, people, look after the vaccine, you got titers all over the place. They are, the longevity is much longer than after natural infection. So much, even the science was not under control, right? And then they take all these measures, this incredible measures of starting to vaccinate like 60-70% of all the people, regardless of whether they have been part of the clinical trials or not. It just, to me, as 30 years of vaccinology, immunology, infectious diseases, it blew me away. Although I knew that, at the very highest level, at the top of all these organizations, the CEOs in the vaccine industry, the top of WHO, of all these global health organizations, they are simply the top. They have good people, but at the top, they're completely incompetent and just driven by plenty of conflicts of interest. And once the contracts got signed, Paul, there was no way back, of course. There was no way back. Once all the contracts were signed, there was no way back. And that is where the lies started. The lies, and where the censoring at every started. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I still maintain that one of the major factors, the initial thing was for me panic. And if you have not the knowledge, you panic because you don't know what's happening. All these guys, they are responsible for huge organizations. So people think they know it. Those guys know it, and look at their staff. They have many publications, etc. But in fact, they didn't know. They didn't know what to do. They had the WHO this was a scandal back, 10 years ago in the Ebola crisis, and WHO came too late. It was all over the place. Everybody was insulting WHO. It was like a scandal what they did. They came too late. They were taking again faulty measures, etc. And then they thought, now comes COVID. This could be a pandemic. We need to make sure that this time we are on time, and we intervene as soon as possible. And then they see, they feel, they find out that what they're doing is wrong. The most obvious thing was that they had to admit that these vaccines, even the mass vaccination, could not curtail transmission of the virus, right? And so they found out we have been doing something, because a pandemic, what is a pandemic? It's the spread of the virus worldwide. So if you want to intervene, you need to make sure that you can cut that transmission. Now, that was the thing that the vaccine wasn't able to do, for sure. And then, of course, they find out this whole thing is wrong, but everything got signed, everything got mobilized, the politicians and all the stakeholders, etc. And that is, of course, where all these lies, censorship, this cruel behavior of medical associations, versus people like you and many others have started. And where all of a sudden we felt like powerless, because people still think, well, that's not possible because there is no logic, and see these and these and these. But they forget one thing, is that this lobby is incredibly powerful, right? I mean, I work with all of these organizations, the for-profit, the non-profit, global health, vaccine industry, etc. I had an opportunity to look behind the screens, what's going on, right? And the conclusion, just in 2 sentences, is that the people working there, the vast majority of people, are people like you and me, having the heart on the right place, being diligent, very competent. Unfortunately, these are not the people who take the decisions. The people who take the decisions are at the very top. And that is, of course, always, whether this is in church, in politics, in industry, whatever association, it's at the very top that you find corruption, that you find all the hidden agendas. These people are busy 80% of their times to defend themselves, to protect themselves, and they have major conflicts of interests, and they are taking the decisions, unfortunately. So that is a little bit what happened, and makes this so unbelievable to people who are just using legitimately their common sense looking at this. Because even in medicine, like you were saying, Paul, there is common sense. If you have a patient that is suffering, that is having certain symptoms, inflammatory disease, and that it's an infectious process, etc. You use your toolbox, and you use what you can to help the patient. That is medical common sense, like you were saying, or like I was saying, innate immunity. It's you don't need to be an immunologist to know that your first line of immune defense is very protective. Well, you don't need to be a highly specialized surgeon, medical doctor, to know that if a patient is ill and has been infected, that you need to rely on the toolbox you have, and use the medications and the therapy and the medical approaches that by your experience are going to help.
It was working fine for children, wasn't it? Innate immunity was protecting them. They were protected. They were protected.
I mean, that is the only thing that children can rely upon. They get born, they're completely immunologically naive, except for the innate immunity that they have, right? And that innate immunity becomes crucial by the time the maternal antibodies are, of course, declining. Now, if you so that innate immunity needs, of course, to mature. It needs to be exercised, etc. If you tell the newborn, don't worry, we are going to take that task of your task list, and we are coming with antibodies. We are going to do the job, not your innate immune system. Then, of course, as long as these antibodies or that adaptive immunity are doing a good job, but we knew very soon that they are not doing the right job, because they do no longer correspond to the circulating variants. Then this newborn is left with an adaptive immunity that is just, doing a lot of harm, and it cannot train and further develop its innate immune system, right? And that is a catastrophe, basically. especially because this adaptive immunity comes with memory, right? I mean, we have all heard about the antigenic sin, etc. Every single time they get exposed to some kind of variant that can no longer be neutralized by these antibodies. Nevertheless, this whole battery of adaptive immune responses is going to be recalled, re-stimulated for no reason. And at the end of the day, it's even leading to autoimmune responses, immune inflammatory diseases, and all this kind of stuff. We know very well, in the meantime, the whole portfolio of secondary effects that you can have by stimulating an immune system in the wrong way. That's basically a catastrophe, right? And everybody knows this. Everybody knows that autoimmune diseases, it's a very nasty thing because it's stimulating in the wrong direction. Everybody knows that immune suppression, not having enough immunity, like, being origin of cancers and all kinds of other chronic diseases that can flare up, etc. Everybody knows that this is catastrophe. Nevertheless, they have almost like, I'm not saying on purpose, but that was clearly what they were doing, stimulating immune responses that were harmful, that were not effective. And an immune response that is not effective is always causing harm. That is also something, if you talk about also immune escape, insufficient, immune defense, the virus escaped, the virus is going to further evolve. It becomes not only an efficacy issue, it becomes also a safety issue, right? Yeah,
Yes.
over.
Can I ask you to go somewhere else, Doctor? We've been interviewing people in the freedom movement because Australia, there's a freedom movement, basically because our rights were being taken away. A lot of those people lost their jobs, nurses, doctors, you name it, mechanics. If you didn't take the vaccine, you were kicked out of society.
Yeah.
And instead of crawling back, lifting up their sleeves going, please vaccinate me, they got new jobs, they started new lives. They actually didn't start a journey, they began an odyssey. They lost family, they lost friends, they lost status, and yet they're still here. And now they're almost stronger than they were. A lot of them actually see COVID as a blessing because they've become a different person than they were pre-COVID. So the question to you is, you've been in the firing line, in the front line since the beginning. What has been the effect on your life? Have you lost family and friends who think you're crazy for doing this? Have you paid a cost to actually stand by your truth to get to here? And have you benefited in any way?
Well, Michael, in contrast, I must say, to many colleagues and other frontline fighters, I don't know whether I should say whether I was lucky, whether I have been smart, whether my strategy was correct, but I'll be very open with you. I've not been suffering at all. Right.
Wow.
First, yeah, it has been, I think, to a large extent luck. But I tell you why. Well, first of all, before the COVID started, I've never been on social media. I don't even think I was using, back in those days was still Twitter, of course, a little bit of LinkedIn. And all of a sudden, when I started to make these videos and go on social media, my children, relatives, family were like, come on, Geert is a serious guy. If he does this type of things, there must be something very, very serious. There must be, otherwise he would not be doing this. So I didn't even have to explain to relatives, family, and good friends.
Wow.
The biology behind this or the immunology behind it. It was just, I had this credibility. So so that is the first thing, Michael, because as you are pointing out correctly, for many people, it became an unbearable, even private situation. So I was in a safe harbor. I was surrounded by people who trusted me, my family, friends, partner, etc. So there was no hassle within the family, within my immediate environment. Then secondarily, I lost all my contracts, with all biotech, non-profit organizations, consultancy. My business was like closed down within 6 weeks. But I had the inspiration, the idea of setting up this company in the US, Voice for Science and Solidarity, that still exists. And because I knew that, first of all, if I wanted to have a major impact, if my message wanted to have a major impact, it was for me so important that I could reach as many people as possible. And I mean, if I give a podcast or an interview in Belgium, there's maybe 200 people who are going to watch. If you do this in the US, it's like 200,000 people, right? So that was my goal. But in the meantime, and that was not on purpose, I was very lucky, these people started to make big donations. Although I've never been begging for money, most of the things I've been doing is for free, but I've always been very consistent in my message. I've never been really political in the sense that, I would of course say these global health organizations forget about this because they are simply incompetent, but I would not point to certain people in particular, right? And I always stick to the science. And I think the consistency of that and not blaming anybody in particular, unless somebody would attack me personally, then because, and of course, after these 30 years of insight in immunology, vaccinal microbiology, but it couldn't be any more in the center of my field of expertise what happened than this pandemic and the vaccination and the virology that went with it. So I was from the very beginning very confident about what I was saying. And this certainly helped enormously because every time I attacked, every time I voiced my opinion, it was always based on science. And I must say, some people have tried this to counter my arguments in writing. And either I invited them for an open scientific debate, there was never a follow-up, or I wrote and, I wrote my arguments, I countered their arguments and said, okay, let's see what follows right now. But so the science in that regard has helped me a lot, the consistency, my private environment, and then many congresses have been organized where I had the opportunity, Michael, to meet such great people like we are talking right now. I mean, when do you get to meet these great people in your life? You can sometimes be on a vacation and you meet people and you say, well, this is fantastic. I mean, I met these people. And this happens once or twice in a lifetime. Now, all these people that we were meeting, it was like after 5 minutes, we felt like we were friends because we were all going through the same, the same crisis. All these people having a very similar mindset, also being open about many other topics that we are confronted, that we are faced with in life, etc. So I must say, in contrast to many people, to me, it has been an amazing time, very positive. And then on top, and this is a little bit sad to say, because on one hand side, what happened was very catastrophic, a scandal, really. But in terms of the science, Michael, what happened, it's the most intriguing, the most unbelievable thing I've ever been touching up with regard to the science in my whole career. Because this is a complex biological phenomenon where immunology, virology, vaccinology, evolutionary biology, it comes all together. And it's like, I've always been, my goal of my career, certainly in the last 20 years of my career, has not been to write publications on one or the other topic. For me, it has been solving problems, solving complex health problems, and by doing this, giving back also to society. because all these idiots in their ivory towers, in academia, it's all based on publications. The more publications, the more funds you're having, etc. But they are not contributing to solving problems. So for me, the challenge was, how can you put these pieces of the puzzle together? I'm always saying I'm not the top expert, neither in vaccinology, nor in virology, nor in immunology. But I've learned to have a very good understanding of these disciplines and to put pieces of the different disciplines together. And that is what helps you to solve a problem. So this has for me been an amazing exercise, in fact. But I'm probably one of the exceptions. Yeah. Over.
Do you despair for what's happened to science? Because science in Australia, I don't know about Belgium, but it's like a religion now. You can't question it. Trust the science. That's it. And
The
if you dare
science.
to question, if you dare to question the science, they go, "Oh, you don't trust the science," and you're out. There's
Yeah.
we've had no debates, nothing. It's just attacks, really, for daring to
But
question it.
but Michael, the big problem is that there is no open debate, and these people, they can be very loud, and they can pretend a number of things, but they will always refuse to engage into a scientific debate, because when it comes to the science, my first questions, and I'm always telling people, friends and everybody, in fact, who tells me, who's complaining that they are confronted to these idiots that are simply saying, yeah, you don't trust the science, and look, that has been published, and our experts are pretending this and this and this. And I'm always having 4 questions. I tell them, ask these 4 questions. The first thing is, everybody, you don't need to be a scientist. Everybody would acknowledge that what happened, the biological phenomenon, has to do with immunology. Everybody agrees with this. So it's all the talk about the antibodies, etc. Everybody agrees that this has to do with the virus. Well, most of the people are conspiracy theorists that are saying there's no virus. Well, I won't go there. And everybody will, of course, also acknowledge that the vaccines are involved, and that, of course, the virus has been evolving, right? We have seen the virus becomes more and more infectious. And then you ask, this guy who is telling you, that they follow the science and you are not following the science, etc. What is their knowledge with regard to vaccinology, immunology, virology, evolutionary biology, for example? And then you ask them as well, do these guys have a conflict of interest? This is a major point, Michael. This is a major point. I can tell you, and everybody knows this, I'm completely independent. I'm one of the freest scientists in the world, probably.
Wow.
No single conflict of interest, and everybody, because you can imagine that somebody like me and others, of course, who raise their voice, if you have a minor conflict of interest, they would immediately reveal this.
Rip you to shreds.
And then the third question is, when these guys are so convinced that what they are saying is the truth, why don't they challenge me in a TV debate, for example? It would be so easy, Michael. They could ridicule me, and then, you're done with it. Vanden Bossche, you can forget about it. Look what this idiot is answering to my question. So why don't they give us the opportunity to confront them, because they could they could kill it just in a few minutes if they are so convinced. And then the fourth question is, what they are saying and what they are recommending, or what they are imposing to some extent, would they be willing to take personal, private accountability for this? When I'm saying everything what I'm saying, I've always been saying, I consider myself being accountable for what I'm saying. When I'm talking about immune escape, when I'm talking that this is going to have a bad end, this is not going to have a happy end, right? I'm willing, they could put me in prison when this doesn't come out, right? Truly, is any of them willing to say, well, okay, that is what I'm saying, that is what I'm pretending, that is what I'm mandating. And if this reveals to be the wrong decision, I feel personally accountable. None of them will. With these 4 questions, you can then ask them, so now what about the science? But I think you won't have any further answers. The conflicts of interest is a major thing, and it has deeply penetrated in the science, as we know, with all the journals right now, with the so-called peer-reviewed journals. Unfortunately, it has deeply penetrated in that academic world as well. It has deeply penetrated, Michael, in the regulatory agencies. I can tell you back 15, 20 years ago, when I was working, and especially at the beginning, 30 years ago, with this vaccine industry, with these companies, I mean, they were so fearful for the regulatory authorities, because the regulatory authorities back in those days were really doing their job. We were extremely nervous the days before we had to interact with FDA on, some claims and some data, etc. That has completely changed. There is bribery all over. All these guys receive, after a few years of regulatory service in a regulatory agency, they get a nice job in the pharmaceutical industry where they make at least twice the money they made in the agency, etc. This is the problem. It's all perverted. Corruption is everywhere. And then somebody asks you, and that's what the science says, right? Challenge them. We cannot be silenced. We cannot keep our mouth. We should fight aggressively, but I'm willing, to debate with anybody who pretends that this was the right thing, that was the science, etc.
Oh, we've got a doctor you could get on with, Dr. Dan. He's not here at the moment. We've got a cardiologist who attacks us on every show. Everyone we've had on, he attacks. So, yeah, you're welcome to debate him. We could host it here. No problem, Dan. And bring it on, brother.
It got so bad that I actually there's the word science that we know, and I have another word called science that I spell with a $ and a trademark symbol after it. And I actually think you have to pronounce it slightly differently. Science, just to have the right level of contempt for the corruption. And I'm glad you mentioned the word corruption, because every time I hear the words conflict of interest, I think corruption.
But that is corruption. It is corruption, especially. I mean, we all know, and that's an important point actually, because that is one of the reasons, Paul, why so many people follow the narrative. I can talk for my country, for example. People in the meantime are used to the fact that there is a lot of corruption in the financial business, in the tax-paying stuff, and all these type of things. Everybody knows this, right? And at some point, Belgium was even called the Little Italy, right?
Oh, really?
But that there would be corruption. Here comes the point: that there would be corruption with regard to public health in Belgium, that used to have, and I think still have, one of the strongest, not only social security, but also health systems. We have plenty of universities, plenty of hospitals, really world class, right? So people, and we have been, very well treated with regard to healthcare during all these years. And then all of a sudden, the Minister of Health says, people, you need to take, there is a pandemic, serious condition, you need to take this vaccine. Look, vaccines can be very beneficial, they protect your children, etc. Nobody, but really almost nobody, would ever think that corruption would extend to one of the sectors where Belgium had really a quite famous reputation, right? And where everybody was on a daily basis finding out that the system was working very well, that there were huge reimbursements of it made, in Belgium, health and the health system and good healthcare is literally accessible to everybody, right? So of course people, they all walked away with this narrative, right? They say, yeah, Geert, can you imagine that health officials would do a thing like this to their population? And I always say, no, not intentionally, but it happened. It happened, right? So that is corruption, because if it affects certain, or if it involves certain businesses that can cause some financial harm or a judiciary harm or whatever, I'm not saying that's okay. But when it touches upon people's health, then of course this is corruption. Any conflicts of interest that interferes with people's individual or public health is corruption. There is no other word. And, I'm a scientist. We don't take these words lightly, that we would, start to swear and to call everybody a criminal and everything is corruption, etc. But, let's use the definitions as they stand, right? And that is corruption. There is no doubt about this.
Geert, can I ask you, I had, of the complaint that was sent to me to justify the emergency suspension of my license in the public interest in 2021, this was one of the other posts, and it says, antibody-dependent enhancement for beginners. The virus you're vaccinated for comes along, and instead of protecting you, you get much sicker and die. This happened with RSV vax, dengue vax, and in previous coronavax trials in humans. Antibody-dependent enhancement, was I right to call that out?
Yeah, well, of course there was antibody-dependent enhancement. Now, again, Paul, because there is so much misunderstanding in immunology, and I started, I think, 2 years ago. I've done 2 sessions. I started, and I will come back to your point, of course, an online course on pandemics, epidemics, etc., focusing on the immunology. I also, educated people on how vaccines work, and also the childhood vaccines, etc. Completely unbiased, completely scientific. It was a success. There were a lot of people who subscribed and were very satisfied, and I put a lot of time and energy into this. But it was also part of the objective was also to clarify some things, because, for example, people talk about herd immunity. And then, I ask, what do you think? What is herd immunity exactly? It seems like many people have a completely wrong idea of what herd immunity is. And then it's also to some extent applying to antibody-dependent enhancement of disease and antibody-dependent enhancement of infection, right? So with dengue and a number of other diseases, we see oftentimes antibody-dependent enhancement of disease, where the wrong antibodies, would say, the wrong match, would opsonize a virus and would enhance its uptake in an antigen-presenting cell, which first of all is completely paralyzing the antigen-presenting system, which is the core of the adaptive immunity. And secondarily, when on top, this virus can also replicate in the antigen-presenting cell, well, then you have like target cells, additional target cells that are, not prepared, I would say, to manage viruses. So, but that is a little bit different of what happened with Omicron, I would say. Omicron was, of course, the antibodies that were raised by the vaccines were not at all suited to control Omicron, because, as you know, Omicron had over 30 mutations in spike alone. And I think most of these mutations were clearly in the receptor binding domain. And then what you got is all of a sudden a virus that is now confronted with antibodies that have poor, very, very poor neutralizing capacity. So what then happens is many of the antibodies that are raised are non-neutralizing. And these antibodies can nevertheless attach to the virus. They cannot neutralize it, but they can attach to the virus. And they can change its steric conformation in a way that it enters much more easily into susceptible cells. And that's what you have seen with, you're a medical doctor. I don't know whether you have observed this, but once Omicron came, the incubation time after the infection was no longer like 4 or 5 days. It was like sometimes 24 or 48 hours. It enhanced the infectiousness of the virus. And by the way, that is one of the reasons why when Omicron started, at the advent of Omicron, the infection was so quick, so fast, that the immune system didn't have the opportunity to train the innate immune system. It was like blowing through that innate immune system, immediately eliciting antibodies, etc. So that is antibody-dependent enhancement of infection, which in this case was in fact not antibody-dependent enhancement of disease, because with antibody-dependent dependent infection of disease, you usually have more severe disease, right? More severe disease. With Omicron, it was like, I'm not going to say that there was protection against severe disease, but there was the infection spread enormously, very, very fast. The kinetics were clearly increased, but not the severity of the disease, right? So these are kind of like notions that are not always correctly understood. And it comes, of course, with the intrinsic complexity of the immune response, especially, I'm always saying the behavior of the virus depends very much on the immune system, but it's all also the opposite. An antibody, the function of an antibody can very much depend on what this antibody is dealing with. If it is dealing with a virus that can be neutralized, well, the virus will be neutralized. If it is dealing with a virus that has neutralizing epitopes that have completely mutated, it will attach to the virus. It can build agglomerates that can easily be taken up by antigen-presenting cells, for example, but it can also change the steric conformation of free virions so that they enter much more easily into susceptible cells, for example. You see, and these guys, these experts, so to say, they are either virologists, have no clue about immunology, and certainly not about the complex interaction between the pathogen and the immune system. You always need to see this as one entity. You cannot say, oh yeah, the virus has become more virulent. I'm always saying any virus that enters your body in the complete absence of an immune defense, of immunity, is virulent, is going to be highly virulent. It's going to destroy your cells. It's going to expand, it's going to replicate, to spread, etc., because there is no immune defense, right? So there is a number of notions that are so confusing, even to the scientists. Yeah.
And that's the problem, isn't it? That hasn't the immune system, particularly the vaccinated, been affected in a way that makes them more vulnerable? So it's not just how the virus itself, but the hosts and their ability to even before we discovered about the IgG4 class shift, it was like the immune system has been over time is just starting to ignore the coronavirus more and more, which is allowing it to multiply. But we have to touch on the inescapable immune escape pandemic, because this is what I was saying about severity assessment scores. I always look at tail risks, and 4 years ago this was a very small tail risk. I thought this is possible. Autoimmunity is possible. Cancer is possible. Genetic integration is possible. But they were tail risks. I never imagined that we would start finding evidence for these things. And I guess my question is, when it comes to the immune escape pandemic, how close to midnight are we?
Pardon? What is your question?
Like with the atomic clock, midnight is it's similar to an nuclear war. What are your feelings at the moment about how the immune escape pandemic is progressing?
Yeah, well, this is Paul. This is a very good question, and I've in fact more or less stopped to do interviews or to have videos, etc., because it becomes so incredibly difficult for people to believe my predictions, because as an advocate of the devil, you could say, I could easily make that point. You could say, Vanden Bossche, what is he talking about? I mean, we see that there is, the acute infections have clearly diminished. The times where somebody got COVID and like 2 days thereafter he had, to be hospitalized, ambulances all over the place, ventilators, very acute cases. Those days are gone. So we have much less acute symptoms. If you look at all the curves on the viral load in wastewater, for example, they are pretty low. I'm not saying that from time to time there is a peak, a small peak, etc., but they are pretty low. The mutations have been slowing down. The rate of the mutations have been slowing down. There are still mutations, of course. The virus is still evolving, but it has been slowing down. So, people who don't have any clue about immunology, including, of course, our public health authorities, they are kind of like saying, well, we start to have herd immunity. This virus is becoming endemic, and then I'm asking, come on, have you ever seen an endemic virus that ends up with like 4 or 5 waves during the summer season? I know your summer season is different from ours. During the summer season, this doesn't happen. And that affects people of all ages, right? It's not like young people don't get this, etc. So the thing is that the complexity behind what is going on right now, the manifestation thereof is that 90% of the threat is under the water. We only see like the top of the iceberg. And what is the top of the iceberg right now is like the long COVID, right? Remember, if you want to summarize this.
I'll be back in 2 seconds. I think my picture's frozen, has it?
Yeah. But can you still hear me, Paul?
I can hear you fine, yes.
Yeah.
If I pop out, it's just me getting my camera fixed.
Yeah. So in fact, this whole pandemic of acute disease, which was typical for COVID, has now turned into what I'm calling a pandemic of chronic disease or prolonged disease, where you have more and more, you haven't that many of these acute cases anymore, but you have more and more of the long COVID. You have more and more of all kinds of diseases that are associated with chronic stimulation of the immune system in a way that is not appropriate. So these are autoimmune diseases. These are like allergies. These are also like the cancers, of course, because we know that cancer cells are kept continuously, and we know that we develop cancer cells all the time. But we know also that in most people, luckily enough, they are largely kept under control by our T cells and K cells, by our immune competent cells, right? So that is what you see right now, and it has an impact on of course, the mortality rate and the excess deaths, etc. But that is something, if something becomes chronic, Michael, you see that people, they are quite rapidly adapting to that situation. If you have an acute thing that all of a sudden shakes the whole society, then people are panicking, it's in the news, etc. But then this thing become chronic, and it's like, people adapt to this, and it's like it's gone. But I can tell you, to Paul's question, that the situation right now is, for me, in my humble opinion, in my humble scientific interpretation, it is highly alarming, because what is happening under the water surface is that this virus is now, and there is an interesting publication about this. I just read this a couple of days ago. It's from the Chinese Medical Association together with Oxford University. And they are now seeing that more and more people are developing T-cell responses that can kill virus-infected cells. So what that means is that if you start progressively developing cells or maturing T cells into T cells that have the capacity to really kill virus-infected cells, that means this is a threat to the virus. The virus, in order for the virus to survive, it needs to transmit from one person to the other. Why is this? Because a virus replication, relies on living cells. It cannot, like a bacterium, replicate autonomously. It depends on living cells, so it must be transmitted from one person to the other. Of course, if now cells in the body of people who are in fact undergoing this prolonged infection, I don't want to talk about chronic infection, but it's a prolonged infection. If these people ultimately develop T cells that have the capacity to kill virus-infected cells, this is an enormous threat to the virus, because that means that less virus will be excreted. That may already be the reason why the virus levels in wastewater are pretty low, and hence this is a threat to the transmission of the virus. And so what will happen here, and I'm 200% convinced of this, of course, in a short interview, it's difficult for me to explain all the steps, but what it will come down is, and it comes down in fact to the question, if that is happening, is there still anything the virus can do to resist this? Right? Like you have resistance to neutralizing antibodies, right? Is there also some kind of resistance that could develop to cells that have now managed to acquire the capacity to kill virus-infected cells? And the answer is yes. All the resistance that we have seen right now, Michael, you have heard about, the mutations. You have heard about how the virus evolves and the spike protein epitopes that are evolving. All this relates to proteins. Epitopes, part of the virus that can stimulate an immune response. These are part of proteins. We have not talked about the many sugars that cover the surface of the virus. We call them glycans. And those sugars, clearly, they are not proteins. They can simply avoid that the virus is recognized by antigen-presenting cells. So the virus is covered by glycans, by sugars, but changes in the pattern of these sugars can take place. These are also mutations. Big changes can take place in a way that antigen-presenting cells, for example, who are the cornerstone of the immune system, are bypassed. So that means these viruses are shielded for the antigen-presenting cells, and they are no longer taken up by the antigen-presenting cell, which means that no immune response whatsoever can still be induced against a virus that has such a modified glycan sugar shield, right? So that means that the full adaptive immunity, as well antibodies, as the T cells, are completely bypassed. And that these changes can take place. I mean, there is major evidence in the literature. This is another field that is involved in the study, or should be involved in the study of epidemics, pandemics, which is glycobiology, the biology of sugars that cover microorganisms and how they can help the pathogen to completely subvert, mislead the immune system. And that is something that, as long as we have, the virus propagating and being transmitted, mutations that happen, that have this appropriate shield of sugars that can subvert the immune system, will be selected because they have a competitive advantage. Others will not have a competitive advantage because they will be taken up by susceptible cells. Those susceptible cells will be recognized by those T cells that have the capacity to kill, and hence that is not favorable to evolution. But those guys that have this modified glycan shield will be able to circumvent this whole antigen-presenting system, the whole adaptive immune system. And that is where I'm saying this will go very, very fast. We will shift, not only, that is what we have done already, from an acute pandemic to a chronic pandemic. That is also what the WHO said. At some point, they were saying, well, the acute phase of the pandemic has ended. They were not saying we are now shifted to a chronic phase where you will see more and more long COVID cases, where you will see more and more results from immune dysregulation in terms of cancers, autoimmunity, allergies, etc. But what I'm saying is that in order for nature to restore this balance between the pathogen and the immune system, we will have a hyperacute phase where the virus will evolve or will be selected, a virus that can completely bypass the adaptive immune system. And then you can ask the question, is everybody going to die? Of course not, because there is a number of people, luckily enough, who have taken the opportunity of the pandemic to train their innate immune system. They have not been vaccinated, for example, and they have trained their first line of immune defense is strong enough to deal with this virus. Why? Because the innate immune system does not rely on antigen presentation. It's the first line of immune defense that can be fully functional without the need for the antigen presenting system to intervene. And there is, of course, also people who got vaccinated after they had already encountered the virus and have to some extent been able to train and to strengthen their innate immunity. So biology is never black and white, but I can tell that those people who have suffered severe vaccine breakthrough infections, for example, or those guys that are now developing long COVID and all the secondary diseases, I would call them vaccine-associated immune dysregulation, these people will be highly, highly susceptible. And I can't say what type of the population this is exactly, but you won't see these things happen. And I'm declare myself fully accountable for saying this. You will not see this happen in Africa, for example, or in populations that have been barely vaccinated, right? Because they fully rely on their natural immunity, or their innate immune response that will get trained. And already, all the people that I know that are not vaccinated, of course, people that are pretty healthy, not having underlying diseases, taking care of their health. These are not people who are having hangovers all the time, who are not having enough sleep, who are stressed out all the time, living a normal, healthy life. I don't know anybody who has contracted severe disease. I know people who have been contracted disease. I've contracted it several times, right? Just like 4 or 5 days, not feeling well, coffee, runny nose. I even had this razor blade, disease where, this is where you get a sore throat, but it's like they call it razor blade. You can barely swallow, you can barely eat, but it goes away after a few days. So that is of course, why are unvaccinated people getting this? It's because the virus has now become so highly infectious. I can tell you, if we wouldn't have this trained innate immunity, it could almost kill you on the spot. The virus has been driven to a high level of infectiousness because of the immune escape. You're chasing something that you cannot really kill or that you cannot really catch. Well, the strongest will survive. The weakest, they will be caught and they will be killed. But the strongest, they will survive and they will replicate themselves. The strongest in this case means the more infectious viral particles. They will survive. So this virus has become highly infectious. That is the reason why, of course, also young children who are not vaccinated can get the disease. I'm not the kind of immunologist who say, oh, that is true, that is bullshit. All the vaccinated people, they're just fine, and stop this nonsense with the unvaccinated. No, the unvaccinated children, they have their innate immune system, but they still need to train it. So at the beginning of life, it is pretty sensitive. And when they are now confronted with a circulating virus that is highly infectious, yes, they will get a disease. You need to treat them. Are they going to die? No, unless there is some complications that are happening. But it is completely normal for unvaccinated people to get a disease right now because circulating fear is highly infectious. And that's the only weakness, Michael. That's the only weakness of innate immunity. The first line of immune defense is very broad. It can be trained in everything, but it cannot deal with a very high infectious pressure. It's like, at the border, again, of the country, you would have the infantry. And, if the enemy is coming, they can deal with it. But if now all of a sudden you have like an overload of enemies trying to penetrate into that country, well, some of them will actually be able to penetrate. But you can deal with this by training your innate immune system. It's like this, heavyweight lifter who starts with 30 kilograms above his head, and he's training and training. And at the end, he lifts like 50 and 60 kilograms. It's a matter of training. But that training is easy because we are exposed all the time. People just don't imagine the virus, the COVID, is circulating all over the place. Everybody gets exposed to this unless you lock yourself up into a concrete bunker or something, right? It's highly infectious. It's everywhere because many of these people who are now chronically infected, so to say, long COVID, they are not sick enough to no longer show up in society. They don't feel well, etc. But they're still, they are still going to work. They are still seeing family, relatives, etc. It's not like the acute system where you are in bed and you feel like almost this is killing you. And that is what is contributing, of course, to further spreading the virus in a kind of almost asymptomatic way. They are mildly infected. They have chronic discomfort, of course. But in terms of the infection, it's not very, very acute. So they are still mixing up with, mingling up with other people, and that is what keeps the infection going. And that is also why we can really say today, because this is the major issue, we don't have herd immunity. Because when you have herd immunity, the virus, this prevents the virus from transmitting. And that is how, you get an endemic situation. But we don't have this. It's just that all of this is happening underneath the water surface, and that most people don't see. The only thing people see right now is the top of the iceberg, which are the secondary effects from all the nasty effects of the mRNA vaccination with integration, with toxicity, all these type of things, and of course the long COVID and the cancers that go up, etc. But I'm always saying all these secondary effects, although they are dramatic and although it's important that people know about them, but they are still peanuts compared to the devastation that we will see when this highly virulent virus, it's highly virulent, in highly vaccinated populations, because it depends on the immune status, as I was saying. It will not be highly virulent for the unvaccinated. But when this happens, of course, there will be a significant percentage of the situation that will not survive. And that is something I take full accountability for saying this, because this is so compelling from all viewpoints, whether you look at this from virological, immunological viewpoint, evolutionary viewpoint. But people don't want to hear about this anymore. It's also the reason why I'm no longer writing longer articles about this, barely any interviews, because people are like, we are fed up with the whole thing. Please shut your mouth, and life goes on, and we'll see what happens. Over.
Good.
Sorry for being so long about it.
No, that's good. Good. I wrote a post on my Substack, and I'm not writing regularly anymore, not for about a year. But maybe a couple of years ago, I believe I quoted you.
Can you still hear me, Michael?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, okay. I'm just in shock.
Yeah. Of course.
I,
But,
I have I have one other question. I'll wait till after Paul has said it, but yeah, I'm in shock. Yeah,
it is shocking, and it's the reason
it
why
is.
I'm not excited about doing many interviews, because this is basically bad news. But remember, everybody knows that if you trigger the immune system, it's very different from drugs. If you trigger the immune system to learn something, it's like an elephant. It will remember this for the rest of your life. So now, if
Wow.
you put your immune system on the wrong track and you have continuously these reinfections, what is going on, it will recall on every occasion this wrong immune responses, right? And that is doing a lot of harm. Not only that these immune responses will end up no longer recognizing the virus whatsoever, but it will also lead, that's what we're already seeing, to secondary immune damage in terms of autoimmunity, cancers, chronic diseases flaring up, allergies, you name it, right? And excess deaths. But that is not the end of the story, right? The end of the story will be that nature, and this is not about philosophy, this is about really biology, will clean up this whole mess so that the population that remains will have the capacity, to build herd immunity and to eliminate this virus. And then it will enter into endemicity, as it would have done probably a few months after the beginning of the pandemic if we wouldn't have intervened in any way at the population level. But of course, taking care of the sick and taking care of the diseased people by excellent therapies that many brilliant doctors like Peter McCullough and many other doctors, of course, also in Australia, have been proposing. But that was, in fact, forbidden because they wanted to sell the vaccines, right? And this was very, very clear. Yeah.
Good. I've done a hashtag a couple
Is
of times.
Paul no longer connecting or connected, or?
Oh, you can't hear Paul.
Pardon?
You can't hear Paul?
Yeah, well, no, I can't hear Paul. No, I can't hear him.
I can't hear you, Paul. I'll ask a question while you're waiting.
I'll log out. I'll be back. I've got a quick question.
Yeah, I can't see his.
What you were just talking about with the how the strong will survive, is that what happened with the plague, the Black Death?
Is that what happened with what?
With the Black Death, the plague in Europe.
Yeah, no. So what will when I say the strongest survive, it's in fact always the Darwin law doesn't talk about the strongest surviving. It talks about those who are best adapted to the hostile environment or surviving, right? So I will give you a very clear example of that. I don't rule out that even vulnerable people, some elderly people, some people with underlying diseases that didn't get vaccinated. Of course, this is a minority because this was the target group, so to say. But let's think there will be some elderly people that are just elderly, not that much of underlying diseases, and but even people who do have maybe some underlying diseases, but who didn't get the vaccine. I would not rule out, on the contrary, I think being unvaccinated, they have a very high chance to survive this, right? So they are clearly not the strongest, but they are the most adapted in a sense that the way this virus is now evolving under pressure of the immune system of the majority of the population that has been put on the wrong track, the way the virus is now evolving as a consequence of this, as a matter of fact, it is clear that the trained innate immune system is now better adapted to control that virus than the misguided, dysregulated, derailed adaptive immune system. So
Geert,
it's
can you hear
always,
me now?
those who can best adapt to the hostile environment. The hostile environment is now a landscape full of circulating viruses that
Variants.
are highly infectious. That is the hostile land.
Yeah.
The one who is best adapted, well, the ones who are best adapted to this are those who trained their innate immune system, and those, where there was no possibility to bypass the innate immune system because they didn't get vaccinated. That is exactly what the vaccines did. And I gave the example of the children. You come in with a vaccine,
Yeah.
well, you prevent the innate immune system from getting trained, which is a disaster if your adaptive immunity ends up failing completely.
Yeah.
There's nothing left then. The only thing that is left is your trained innate immune system, right? And that is so compelling scientifically, biologically, whatever way because I'm not just for me, it's not a matter of sensation. I've been studying this now for 5-6 years, and there are dynamics because it's changing all the time. The virus becomes more and more infectious. The virus
You there, Paul?
I'm still
an
here.
unprecedented gain of function experiment. People are talking about the gain of
Yeah.
function in the lab, but what we have doing, this mass experiment on humans, rendering the virus more and more infectious, and then now most likely rendering the virus more virulent. It's not the case like right now, as I said, it's all under the water, but I'm 200% convinced that this will happen. This is an incredible in vivo gain of function experiment on the very human race. Imagine, you wouldn't even do this on mice, right? Yeah.
No.
No.
And what is that? I see your astonishment, Michael, and exactly as I was saying, since all this is happening under the water surface, since no public health authority is talking about this, and since,
No.
of course,
Nothing
they
in
keep
Australia.
pushing the vaccines, because if they would not
Yeah.
push the vaccines, imagine people would start to think, is there something wrong? Of course, they know that it is a wrong thing to do to further push the vaccines. But if they would not do so, they would lose their credibility. Imagine if one of these public health authorities would now say, well, was probably not the right thing to do. I mean, they would go for them, tear them out of their offices and stone them in the street, right?
Yeah.
That is why
Yeah,
they
they would.
continue pushing this program, right?
I'm
But
afraid.
of course,
It's
it's
still coming.
difficult for people to understand this. But that is what is
Yeah.
behind all this, and they are hiding
Yeah.
everything, and people are so happy that they cannot now. They think restart a normal life, and that all these mandates and all this madness is gone. Maybe not completely gone, but to a large extent. And so they try to get happy again, to do things that make them happy, and all these things is of course deviating their attention. But the biology is there, and nature doesn't give a damn on what politicians and public health authorities are saying, who are not understanding anything, and there is no longer tracking of all this. I was following the mutations and how all this is evolving, even in the US right now. I mean, there's no reporting anymore, so it becomes a black box. It becomes a black box. What's going on, right? Yeah.
Geert, can you hear me? I don't think Geert can hear me.
Okay.
That's the thing. Just one more question before you go. This has always
Yeah.
intrigued me, and I've never had anyone I was in Melbourne. I was a part of the big fights at the shooting where they were shooting the people and stuff. But we were in Melbourne. They had 9 lockdowns in a row.
Michael, I'm not acoustically. It's becoming. There is a lot of background noise all of a sudden. I barely can understand you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
yeah.
maybe we'll end it there because you can't hear Paul either. So maybe we'll call it quits.
Oh, okay.
Would you pass on to Geert? Pass on to Geert. What a pleasure it's been to
But
see
you
him.
can still try to. If you speak slowly, maybe the background noise will be less disturbing. I don't know.
Okay. Let me have a go here. Hello.
It was all fine at the beginning, but now there is this.
Yeah. So Paul, you can't hear Paul anymore.
You can't hear
Well,
me,
I
good?
can. Yeah, no, Paul is back, obviously.
Oh, good. Good. I just wanted to say what a pleasure it was, even though we've been having some audio problems. It's terrifying what you're saying, and I've done a hashtag
Yeah,
a couple of
terrifying.
times called hashtag Geert Vanden Bossche was right, and it terrifies me because this is a hashtag I never want to be successful. You know,
He was too terrified to have you on.
And I think you understand.
Let's get Geert. He
I
says,
think you
I don't know if I want him on.
I think you understand why I don't want you to be right.
Yeah.
But I fear that it is a real risk. And before we leave, I thought one of the things how do we manage this risk? You know, how do we save? There is still an opportunity to save lives, and this is why I still talk the good word about early treatment. You know, because especially for my vaccinated friends, because I still think if you are right, and this is inescapable, we've been blessed to have all this time to prepare. And apart from getting healthy, getting your vitamin D levels up, in our hemisphere, it's easy. We've got the sun. I understand BCG vaccination. There are other approaches to lift the innate immune system. And of course, I would like to see the antivirals like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine available over the counter. I think it's important that it's available over the counter. So to manage the risk. But unfortunately, we still have insane public health that is withholding safe and effective stuff. So I wanted to wrap up before we left with what your thoughts were about how we mitigate this risk.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I mean, and I pray I'm wrong. I really pray I'm wrong. That's why I'm not really looking forward to these interviews. You know, you're fantastic guys. That's not the problem, but the message is pretty sobering. So I pray I'm wrong, but theoretically, we could still do something, but I'm convinced that we will come too late. So what we could do, first of all, you know, with regard to early treatment, I'm convinced, I take full accountability for what I'm saying, that doctors will come too late. Because you have to imagine the kind of mutation that the virus is now preparing for is like a change in the glycan structure that will be able to completely bypass the antigen presentation. That means it will completely bypass the adaptive immune system. It's not like at the beginning where you had the acute infections and there were breakthrough infections where people, you know, they could not control the infection and they got ill, etc. Then you had still the T cells, etc., that kicked in to mitigate the disease symptoms and everything. Here, in terms of adaptive immunity, there will be nothing left because you bypass the cornerstone of the immune system. If these people have not trained innate immunity, and of course, it's not the case for all vaccinees. I already told you, some people had the opportunity to train their innate immune system before they got vaccinated, etc. So it will not be black and white, but there are definitely, especially those people who got vaccinated early on in the pandemic, especially all the vulnerable people with underlying diseases, of course, all the elderly, etc. But there were also other people who later on had still not encountered the virus and were vaccinated right away. Because, as I told you, any virus that has the capacity to destroy cells and that finds itself in your body without any kind of effective immune response, it will blow through your system within 24 hours. This is disseminated intravascular coagulation. The virus will just systemically spread to all your organs. There is no immune defense, right? So what in fact would need to be done, very logically, simply common sense, What we have done, first of all, with the mass vaccination is that we build up a very nefarious, a very detrimental immune pressure in the entire population that was driving the virus to change, to mutate, to become more infectious, ultimately, probably, most likely more virulent. How can you counter this? Well, as I was saying, it's the only thing you have to keep in mind from this interview. As long as we don't have herd immunity, you cannot control this, right? Because people get reinfected all the time. So how to get herd immunity if the immune system cannot do the job? Well, the outcome of herd immunity is always to cut the transmission, to stop the transmission. If you would have like almost now mandates, right? Mandatory prophylactic antiviral treatment, where like the whole population that has been, whose immune system has been completely dysregulated at a large scale level, at the population level, if you would now, impose almost, mass prophylactic drug treatment, antiviral treatment, then of course you could cut the transmission of the virus. It's not by giving 10% of the population these antivirals that's going to happen, right? It could help individually, but what is going to happen, of course, these people could be protected as long as they take ivermectin. And let's say the whole thing stops the pandemic with some substantial losses, most likely. We forget, here comes the complexity, that this virus in the meantime has been also transmitted to animal populations who have, of course, to a large extent herd immunity. I'm not saying that one of the other animal doesn't die from the corona, but, and they are now a kind of like a reservoir for this virus. So
You're
even
saying
if
it's
this huge
prophecies.
wave is going, to pass, then if people stop taking the ivermectin, they get reinfected, of course, by the animal reservoir, and the same thing happens. So it's pretty nasty. I hate to say this, but if I would not be 200% convinced of what I'm saying, I should, I think, shut my mouth, right? So mass countering the detrimental immunological effect of mass vaccination can only be done by mass administration of prophylactic antiviral treatment, because both, only one of them can lead to complete halt on viral transmission. And that is what we need. That is what we need. Of course, you could speculate. I don't know whether this will work, but I'm advising people to do whatever they can, especially people who are part of the susceptible group, that they could try, to the extent that this is safe, is to rev up their innate immunity, to train their innate immunity, for example, by BCG. For example, this would be one possibility. At some point, but I'm very cautious with this because, it cannot be, it could be that it's not for everyone the best indication. But for example, by taking just a measles vaccine, right, a live attenuated vaccine, that is also very successful, these vaccines, because they are live replicating vaccines. They have, of course, also risks. That's why I'm very cautious, but they do stimulate your innate immune system. That's very, very clear, because they are live viruses. So, but like, we have been making a major mistake at a population level with large-scale immunological consequences. Now thinking that, you just take some food supplements or you take some detoxification of the spike protein and you're all set and there we go. I mean, that's not how nature manages these complex derailments. Nature, there is a buffer with nature. You can do some crazy things. You can do, for example, you can start vaccinating 10% of your people on a yearly basis against influenza, which I always think it's not wise. But that can still kind of like managed by nature in a sense that it will not immediately lead to huge immune escape. But we are already saying this for flu as well, although we are only vaccinating a minor part. Because remember, in the past, you could almost always use the flu vaccine from the year before to protect people. Sometimes it was working. Now it's almost no longer working, the strains of the year before. So, but there is a buffer. There is a buffer where, nature can compensate certain errors, certain stupid mistakes that mankind makes. It's probably also the same for climate change and everything, but I'm not an expert for this, so we'll not go there. But if you go beyond this border of what the buffer can do, then you start have, major interventions of nature to correct this, right? And it's basically going down, to starting from scratch again, having again a clean population that can, in a healthy way, build herd immunity and defend itself in terms of a population that can defend itself against infectious diseases by driving the virus into the endemic phase, where of course you could have from time to time an epidemic, but as soon as the virus starts to spread, it will hit again the memory cells of that population, and they will contain the virus within no time. Yes, you will have a peak. Yes, some people on a yearly basis can die, but all in all, the population does a marvelous job by controlling this epidemic within no time almost, right? So you see, these interventions in complex systems without having any knowledge of how all this is interacting, I mean, that in its own right is a crime. And I mean, those criminals, have you heard, Paul, about the plan B that they have? I mean, when I discuss with people, when I challenge even ChatGPT, when I challenge colleagues, nobody dares to say that I'm wrong. Well, they would say, Geert is living in another universe. And of course, they don't understand what I'm talking about, I guess. But nobody dares to say that I'm wrong. So, I mean, this is not for me to say, well, I'm a great guy, not at all. But if it cannot be confirmed or ascertained that I am wrong, why is there no plan B whatsoever when this virus, emerges again in a very violent way? What are they going to do, the public health authority? Are you aware of any plan? And everybody agrees, and it is proven that the virus is still circulating, that it is still causing death and hospitalizations and chronic disease. So we will have to live with this virus. How can you live with a virus that continues to evolve and that is now subject of a gain of function experiment, right?
I do despair sometimes, Gert. This was one of my other posts, vitamin D levels versus COVID fatality. And the higher your vitamin D levels, the less you're at risk. So I thought any sort of health authority or doctors who cared about health could have advised, especially the elderly and the vulnerable, you need to get your vitamin D levels up because there's a direct correlation. We could still be offering that advice now. There are things we can do. I would love to have antivirals, the cheap, safe, known, generic. It should be available.
The only
everywhere.
one is ivermectin. You need an antiviral that is available in very large supply, that has been proven to be safe, and that you can make available at an affordable price, right?
It could be
that
done.
is global access. That is global access. The only one that qualifies is ivermectin.
Yeah,
but
we need,
as I was saying, my fear is that it will come too late.
We need a global parasite cleanse day, or a global parasite cleanse week or month. Then we could get some control of this. I just don't know that we're going to see sanity before we see you proven correct. And like I say, I pray that we're both wrong, because I echoed your warnings. But anything that has got a high severity, potentially high severity impact, just can't be ignored, can't be waved away. We know we can take steps to mitigate the risk. I think it's criminal that we're not addressing it. But
Can I ask you? Can you hear me now, Gert? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you so a bit. There is still background noise, but it's not that.
Paul, can you ask him?
I can hear you.
Can you ask him, Paul? When I was in Melbourne in the lockdowns, we were locked down for almost 2 years. And when Omicron came out, I remember it was like a Monday or a Tuesday, they were talking about Omicron in Africa. Now, our country was sealed. You couldn't get into the country. And yet within a week or 2 weeks, Omicron was everywhere. And yet we were all locked in our buildings. How did that happen?
I don't, first of all, as I was saying, this virus became highly infectious, right? Omicron was for me, the whole pandemic changed with Omicron, right? So in terms of that is as of the advent of Omicron, as of the emergence of Omicron, the whole thing, the whole mess became irreversible, right? And that is why Omicron just blew through the vaccine protection. That is what we call the vaccine breakthrough infections. And the vaccine breakthrough infections, I'm describing this in detail in my book, was leading to what I'm calling immune focusing. So in fact, the immune system started as a result of the vaccine breakthrough infection to concentrate on the wrong regions of spike. This gave broad protection, so to say. So the health authorities were like chanting, yeah, it was fantastic, broad protection even against variants that were not yet circulating, etc. But this protection was short-lived. And, the antibodies were declining very rapidly. It was suboptimal and it enhanced basically the immune escape. But the reason was, first of all, Michael, we know that this is transmitted by air, right? The virus is everywhere. You can look down whatever you want. The most incredibly stupid measure that has ever been taken, it suffices to open the window or whatever, And then secondarily, as I explained to Paul, because of the major changes in the spike, the neutralizing antibodies were no longer working. The non-neutralizing antibodies were attaching in a way to the virus that it enhanced the infection. So antibody-dependent enhancement of infection. So that is for sure. Even the Chinese couldn't contain the virus. And I'm sure you guys have seen what these idiots have been doing, right? I mean, they have been putting up barricades in front of people's houses. They couldn't leave their house for like months. Can you imagine, right? So,
that was us.
Pardon?
That was in Melbourne, 292 days. They locked Melbourne down.
Yeah, Australia. I mean, some of my favorite countries, I'll be honest with you, my favorite countries were Canada and Australia. And then what happened during the COVID, I mean, these were the worst I've ever seen. I couldn't believe this. My favorite town or city was Vienna. Also in Vienna, I mean, it was cruel. Was cruel what they have been doing with people, and not based on any scientific evidence. Everything was wrong. First of all, they came out a lab leak at least, so this was already a major failure. And then on this lab leak, right, they start the mass vaccination, a huge blunder, because with that they initiated, a huge gain of function experiment, on human beings. And then they were like censoring all early treatments, etc. It's one blunder after the other. The masks, the vaccine mandates, the mass vaccination, the way they managed this in the lab or didn't manage this, and all the hidden agendas behind this. It's a scam. It's a shame. It's a shame on humanity. But there is a lot of political discussions, and there is many people, also scientists, that now go the political way, and they think they will be able to change things. I mean, I can tell you, an error like this will not. It's impossible for mankind to correct this. The only force that can correct this is nature. And believe me or not, but I'm not a fool. Believe me. I'm 200% convinced that this is going to happen, right? And I challenge every scientist to discuss this in an open and public debate, not something offline or whatever. So anyway, I'm afraid to share all.
Can I have one more question, Geert, before you go? Do you know any jokes?
Do you know any jobs?
We
Yeah,
can really
yeah,
do with a funny joke.
yeah,
Yeah.
Michael,
Thank
that's
you,
usually
man.
your role.
Is the situation
I
still that
am.
awful in Australia? Is it still
Okay,
that
what's
hard?
happening over here? People are dying everywhere. Young people just dropping
Yeah,
dead. Young Olympic female just dropped dead, and no one says anything. I travel the town in this bus, going town to town,
yeah,
interviewing people. I interviewed a funeral director. She said she's never been busier in 50 years. And I said, does anyone ask, why is all these people dying? She goes, no.
yeah,
It's just silence. It's
yeah.
just silence, and
It's
people. We even had the most just remarkable story after remarkable
yeah,
story.
yeah,
A
yeah.
10-year-old just suddenly died while playing soccer. I think that's the
It's
last one.
incredible.
And you think that these will wake people up, or something will happen. Nothing.
Yeah, I
Died
know, I know. No,
suddenly.
no, that's why I'm saying don't be naive. Don't think mankind will be able to correct this, or there will be awareness, or this lobby is so mighty. They are just laughing about all this. They're just laughing
Yeah.
about this. But I'm laughing about them because I know, and this has nothing to do with the Bible, but I know that the final verdict will come. And it will come from nature. Nobody's
Well, that was
is
a
talking about it.
question, because you did say praying, and what I've noticed, because I didn't take it, neither did Paul. But when I was in the big protests, Jesus was everywhere. I wasn't overtly religious, but
Yeah,
everything was crosses and crucifix. There's a rise in
yeah,
our movement over here, and
yeah.
it's not with fixed religions, but it's people becoming religious. And most people claim that an inner voice told them not to take it.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
questionable from a theological point of view that there is some battle, and those who answered that voice in their soul
yeah,
might have a chance of surviving more than those who answered the voice of the
yeah,
government. And
yeah,
to be
yeah,
honest, just to tell you something from a different point of view, in Melbourne, all the churches were closed, all the priests were online or silent, all the vaccination centers were open, and every morning they had a mass on the TV where they told about the deaths. We lost 4 people last night. But we can keep you safe. Science, trust the science. It's almost like they converted people away from God to say,
yeah,
God
yeah,
can't fix this, trust the science.
yeah,
And now
yeah,
we're paying the price of that. We're
yeah, yeah,
paying the
yeah,
price of,
yeah.
uh,
It's crazy, and the sad thing also, Michael, is that people think, at least in our countries, because they're still trying to push the vaccines, but most of the
here
people,
every day. Yeah,
are still are declining it. But
yeah,
the worst thing is, and people don't understand this, is that I'm always saying, since Omicron appeared, it doesn't matter anymore whether you continue to vaccinate or not, because these repeated infections, they simply act as boosters. These are boosters, right? Boosters of the dysregulated immune response that you have initiated with the vaccines. You don't need to give boosters anymore. This dysregulated immune response is boosted all the time by the vaccine breakthrough infections. And those vaccine breakthrough infections started with Omicron, right? It was very, very clear.
wow.
Omicron came, and all of a sudden, all those folks who have been vaccinated, many of them started to have symptoms, right? COVID. So that is the sad thing. That's why I'm saying, you start something and it gets completely out of control, which is the situation right now. And I tell you, no single public authority is understanding right now what's going on. Right? They're just watching the tip of the iceberg, and they are describing it. Oh yeah, it's moving a little bit, it's changing a little bit, but all in all, it seems like very stable. That's what they are saying, the situation. They have no clue. This is extremely dangerous, right? A public health authority that does not understand, to begin with, what they have been doing, and they don't understand what the consequences are, and they don't understand what should be done right now. And they do not communicate anything to people, right?
No.
They just leave them alone.
Yeah.
It's unprecedented. This will be a major black chapter in the history of mankind.
Yeah.
It's sad, but yeah.
I have to
Okay.
say,
Good.
it's been a joy to have you on. It's actually been really great to meet you. You're a lovely guy.
Well, as soon as possible, I come to Australia. Because
Well,
no,
hopefully
I
there'll be
mean,
some people left.
I had such an sympathy always for the Australians because they can be pretty cool and not afraid of minor things. That is what the reputation of the Australians. And then I see how all these people have been, nevertheless, so heavily coerced, and that even the Australians could not resist to this madness. That the people, was kind of like just without any defense against this. So this for me illustrated how cruel your politicians, health authorities, medical associations have been. I didn't expect this from a country like Australia. I always thought
Or
it's
Canada.
easy life. It's this kind of mandates unbelievable. Canada the same.
We have a saying over here: fear is the virus, courage is the cure. And and that's the but here we are. We're just on this road now. I think the way to survive now is to live day by day, live
Absolutely.
and
I fully
absolutely
agree with you.
enjoy being a human being.
That's also what I'm advising to people. And it's also what I'm doing myself, because of course, with all these insights, I mean, at some point, I'm also getting scared about what is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Even if I don't worry that much about my health, but imagine if all of a sudden the society collapses. Because if the healthcare system collapses, all the rest will follow rapidly. The economical, financial, social, everything will collapse. What is going to happen? But on the other hand, I'm also saying, you need to live. Don't, but to some extent, I try to be prepared. But on the other hand, I try not to think about this. But it's every single time when we have interviews, when I go back to the science, that I'm always hoping, Geert, you will find something that contradicts what you're saying. But there is so many elements. If you have all these pieces of the puzzle, it's not because one single piece is missing that the puzzle is wrong, right? So it's too compelling for me as a biologist.
Did you take the vaccine yourself?
No, of course not. Of course not. No, I knew from the very beginning. No. And as I told you,
there's your argument.
I told you at the beginning, none of my children, of family members did. Because and I didn't even have to convince them a lot. No, but for me it was very, very clear. I mean, was no, not be considering this in any way. We should not think about all the consequences then on fertility and all these type of things. They screw up everything, and now they are there without any plan, without any care about people. It's a big mess, and some say nobody's responsible, right?
Geert, you were one of the early people to speak out. And myself and several other, a doctor and a psychologist, we set up an organization called the Lighthouse Declaration. So it's lighthousedeclaration.org. And the principles of the Lighthouse Declaration are very simple. It's just ethics, informed consent, bodily autonomy, the right to say no, ending mandates, ending censorship, and allowing your physician to treat you, not treat whatever some authority in another country says. So I'd love to nominate you as a lighthouse keeper, as one of the OG lights, in trying to spread the truth of the situation. So hopefully you'll take that on board, and we'll send you an invite.
Yeah, of course, anything I can do to help. The only thing I'm refusing to do is to support people who are adhering to these blind conspiracy theories. I fully understand them. But they don't understand how ignorance, lack of knowledge, incompetence, etc., ultimately evolved into a criminal behavior.
No conspiracy theories, Gert. It's literally pure ethics. If you agree
Yeah,
with
of course, yeah.
the idea was to unite people in a completely non-controversial way,
Yeah.
and return morality and ethics back to
Absolutely. Yeah, that is certainly something I'm entirely endorsing, and I'm doing it very often. I recently endorsed, this kind of something similar from the Italians, also the medical doctors. They have Siena Carte, they call it, and it's also a pamphlet where they protest against all the. It's historical what happened. It's their experiences and also what everything they are proposing, and it was like 60 pages. So we endorse all these things. And in fact, to your point also, Paul, if you maybe this is something for Michael, if you could send me, please, maybe a copy of. Do you make copies of the video, for example, of our?
Oh yeah, I'll send you this.
If you
I'll
can
email
please
it to
do
you.
this, it's the only thing, because we also like to share this, so to make people may like to see this interview,
100%.
or others
I'll make
not.
some
But,
shorts out of it too. I've actually been
that would be great.
documenting times to do shorts, so I'll
Yeah,
get it all to you in the next few days. I think it's really
Oh,
important.
that would be fantastic. Terrific.
It's just haunting to listen to. I think it's really, really important. Yeah. But, I'll tell you something, Gert. Initially, when I was in the movement, I was doing some speeches, and a young girl said to me something that I've always stood by. And she said, Michael, you have a moral obligation not to sell hopelessness, no matter how tight its grip.
Yeah,
But it's
that's
very
true.
hard to do. In these times,
It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do, and I'm in a very difficult situation because I'm in the scientific position, right? I wish I could do this, but it's I stick to the science. That's my strength.
What's the point of you lying?
Yeah.
Lying to us. What's the point?
Exactly.
We can't fix this unless we deal with the truth. We just can't fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll continue to work the problem.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
Solution. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
It
was a great pleasure talking to you. Although it's pretty sobering, the topic we are talking about. But thanks as well for your courage, because we are all one team, right? In this, and we are all in the same fight. So thanks for your courage, and also for sharing the message, and giving the best of yourself, and trying whatever you can do to help people. So that's fantastic.
You too.
Okay, thank you so much. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'm going to get so stoned now that I'm going to be like flying to Mars. Oh my God.
It's a lot to take in, and I've been reading Voices for Science and Solidarity. That's Gert's blog, and it can get very.
I didn't speak much because you're in the presence of a great mind, and what he's saying is so clear and concise and devastating. You're thinking, it was wow.
But I still think on your hopelessness point, I still think there are simple things sitting on the ground that we can do to reduce the impact if and when this happens. And I think so. It's not over, and that's why I'm still pushing to get antivirals available over the counter, and I have a reason for it. Because I'm trying to mitigate.
They say it's not over until the fat lady sings, and since we've got an obesity epidemic, it's probably going to be a long show. You know, I've got to go. Thanks, brother. That was a hell of an interview, Paul.
It was.
God. All right. I'm going out with Exodus. This Exodus song is written to all my freedom friends who are hitting the road like us. It's the reality of our times. And Paul, I know you can't make it, but I'll be at Mullumbimby this weekend. We get there tomorrow. We're going to be there for the weekend for an 8:32 gathering at Mullumbimby, and it'll be good to be with our people, and hopefully we can share some light. Good night, Paul. I love you, brother. God bless. Take care.
Chang bought a van and decked it out, showed us all, had all he needed. Could park it anywhere, free as a bird. But when he flew, he found out fast that the great outdoors is a barbed wire fence. I'm not staying here when the ship goes south, and the shit seems to be already here. I've a backpack with all my needs. Trouble is, when I dream, all I find is that the great outdoors is a barbed wire fence. I'm sure my grandfather left freedom here, unless my eyes were open when I was born. But this world has left me blind. Is that right? Mother, am I blind? I'm sure I smelled freedom once in the backwood forests of your eyes. Hide, you said, hide with me, or how else will we ever live free? There's an exodus heading out of town. Their faces are up, but their eyes are down. There's a sun that seems to be shining upside down, and around and around, upside down, and around and around, upside down, and around and around, until we reach the outskirts of town, where we find time and time again that the great outdoors is a barbed wire